I was sanding the deck railing at my grandfather's lakehouse in Muskoka when the email came through. It was a Tuesday in September, the kind of crisp Ontario morning where the maples are just starting to turn and the lake is so still it looks like glass. My grandfather, Harold, was sitting in his wheelchair on the dock, wrapped in a flannel blanket, watching a pair of loons drift by. He pointed at them and smiled. That slow, gentle smile he gives when the world still makes sense to him. His Parkinson's has been stealing pieces of him for 3 years now. Some mornings he can button his own shirt and tell you exactly how he caught a 30-pound muskie in 1987. Other mornings, his hands shake so badly he can't hold a spoon, and he asks me where Grandma went, even though she passed away in 2019. I wiped the sawdust off my phone and opened the email. It was from my mother. "Exciting news, sweetheart. Your father and I have decided to relocate to Portugal. We've already transferred the funds we need from the family account. It's time for us to live our lives. Please make sure Dad is comfortable. We'll call when we're settled. Love, Mom." I read it twice. Then I looked over at my grandfather, still watching those loons, completely unaware that his own daughter had just tried to rob him blind. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and whispered to myself, "Good thing I froze that account last Friday." If you've ever been the person in your family who actually pays attention, the one who reads the fine print and checks the bank statements while everyone else just assumes things will work out, then you need to hear what happened after that email. Because this story isn't just about money. It's about what happens when the people who are supposed to protect you decide you're not worth protecting anymore. My name is Nora Aldrin. I'm 31 years old, and I'm a forensic accountant. I work for a mid-sized firm in Toronto, but for the last 2 years, most of my real work has been keeping my family from falling apart. The lake house sits on a beautiful piece of waterfront property just outside Bracebridge. My grandfather bought it in 1971 for what would seem like pocket change today. Over the decades, he turned it into something special. He built a small marina, rented out canoes and kayaks in the summer, and ran a modest fishing guide service. It was never a gold mine, but it paid for itself, and it was his pride. The property alone is now worth well over $1 million. More importantly, it's the only place my grandfather has ever called home. My older brother, Elliot, moved back from Vancouver 2 years ago when Grandpa's Parkinson's got serious. He quit his sous chef job at a restaurant in Gastown, drove his beat-up Subaru across the country, and converted the old boathouse into a small seasonal cafe. He makes butter tarts that people drive 40 minutes for, and his smoked trout bagels are the reason half the cottagers on the lake stop by on Saturday mornings. Elliot handles the food, the charm, and the guests. I handle the numbers. Between the two of us, we keep the lake house running and Grandpa safe. It's not glamorous. Some weeks, after paying for Grandpa's home care aid and the property taxes and the dock repairs, we're barely in the black, but we manage. The only reason we manage is the family trust. My grandmother, before she died, set up a trust with $320,000. She was sharp. My grandma. She knew her daughter. The terms were ironclad. The money was to be used exclusively for Harold's medical care, home modifications, and the maintenance of the lake house property. That's it. No vacations. No personal loans. No borrowing against it. The trustees were me and my grandfather, with me handling all the actual decisions since his diagnosis. My parents, Margaret and Cliff, were explicitly excluded as signatories. Grandma made sure of that. She told me once, a few months before the cancer took her, "Your mother has always loved the idea of money more than the responsibility of it. Don't let her near that account, Nora. Promise me." I promised. My parents are the kind of people who look wonderful from the outside. My mother, Margaret, is beautiful and social. My father, Cliff, is a retired middle manager who spent 30 years at a telecom company doing the absolute minimum required to collect a pension. Together, they've perfected the art of living beyond their means. They refinanced their house in Barrie twice. They leased cars they couldn't afford. They took trips to Cancun and Cuba on credit cards they never fully paid off. And every single time the bills caught up with them, they came to Grandpa. It started small, a few thousand here and there. "Cliff needs new winter tires, Dad. Margaret's root canal isn't covered by the benefits plan. Always an emergency, always urgent, always just this once." My grandfather, because he loved his daughter, always said yes. And my grandmother, because she loved her husband, eventually stepped in and created the trust. She saw the pattern before anyone else did. After Grandma died, my parents went quiet for a while. I thought maybe grief had changed them. Maybe losing her had been the wake-up call. I was wrong. What they'd actually been doing was waiting for Grandpa to get sicker. And once his Parkinson's progressed to the point where he couldn't reliably manage his own affairs, they started circling. The first sign was about 8 months ago. I was doing the quarterly reconciliation of the trust account. There were 3 withdrawals I didn't recognize. 2,000 here, 1,500 there, another 3,000 a week later, all labeled as property maintenance in the memo field. I called the bank. The withdrawals had been made in person at the Bracebridge branch. Someone had presented identification and a signed authorization letter from my grandfather. The signature was shaky but legible. Harold Aldrin. My grandfather can barely hold a pen. I didn't panic. I drove to the branch, spoke with the manager, and reviewed the security footage. It was my mother. She was wearing a nice coat and her reading glasses, looking every bit the concerned daughter handling her elderly father's affairs. She had coached him, I realized. She must have sat with him on one of his better days, put a pen in his trembling hand, and guided him through signing a stack of authorization letters, enough to last her months. I felt sick. Not angry yet, just deeply, profoundly sick. I told Elliot that night. We were sitting in the cafe after closing, the lake pitch black outside the windows. He listened, his jaw tight, his hands wrapped around a mug of tea that was going cold. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "How much have they taken?" 6,500, I told him. So far. He closed his eyes. What do we do? That's the question, isn't it? What do you do when the threat to your family is your family? When the person stealing from your grandfather is his own daughter? When the person forging his signature is the woman who used to tuck you into bed? You freeze. You doubt yourself. You think, maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe there's an explanation. Maybe they really did use it for property maintenance and I just missed the invoices. You make excuses because the alternative, that your parents are genuinely willing to exploit a man who can't defend himself, is too painful to accept. I spent 2 weeks in that fog. 2 weeks of watching my mother visit the lakehouse with a bright smile, bringing Grandpa his favorite maple cookies from the bakery in town, fluffing his pillows, chatting about the weather. And the whole time, I knew she was draining his safety net dollar by dollar. The guilt I felt wasn't for suspecting her. The guilt was for not acting sooner. What broke the paralysis was a Thursday afternoon in late July. I'd come up from the city for the weekend. I was in the small office off the kitchen, reviewing invoices on my laptop, when my mother sat down across from me with a cup of tea and a too casual expression. "Nora, I've been thinking," she said. "With Dad's condition getting worse, shouldn't someone else have access to the trust account, just in case something happens to you? God forbid you're in an accident or something. We'd need to pay for his care." She delivered it perfectly. Concerned daughter, reasonable request. But I'd seen this play before, in 100 fraud cases at work. It's called social engineering, and my mother was running it on her own family. The trust has succession provisions. Mom, if something happened to me, the bank and the estate lawyer handle it. It's all in Grandma's documents. Oh. She stirred her tea. It's just, your grandmother was so private about all of that. I never really understood the details. Grandma set it up that way on purpose. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut glass. My mother smiled, said, "Of course, dear," and left the room. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what she'd really been asking. She wasn't worried about my safety. She was testing the lock on the door. The next morning, I drove back to Toronto and started a full audit. Not just the trust, everything. The lakehouse property records, the mortgage, the tax filings, Grandpa's power of attorney documents. I pulled everything from the land registry office, and that's when I found it. My parents had taken out a home equity line of credit against the lakehouse, $95,000. They had used a power of attorney document that I had never seen before, supposedly signed by my grandfather, granting my father full authority over his real property. The document was dated 4 months ago. The notarization stamp was from a commissioner of oaths in Barrie I'd never heard of. I knew my grandfather's actual power of attorney. I had helped him set it up with our family lawyer, Mrs. Patterson, 2 years ago. It named me as his attorney for property and Elliot as the backup. My parents had no legal authority over his assets whatsoever. They had forged it. They had manufactured a power of attorney, found someone willing to notarize it without proper verification, and used it to leverage my grandfather's home for nearly $100,000. The money was already gone, withdrawn in chunks over 3 months, cash and wire transfers. I traced some of it to a real estate deposit in the Algarve region of Portugal. The first payment on that HELOC was due in 45 days. If it wasn't paid, the bank would begin foreclosure proceedings on my grandfather's home, the home he'd lived in for over 50 years, the home where my grandmother's rose garden still blooms every June. the home where Elliot had built his cafe. They weren't just planning to leave. They were planning to leave us with a debt that would destroy everything. I sat in my apartment at 2 in the morning, staring at the documents spread across my kitchen table, and I finally understood something I'd been avoiding for years. My parents didn't see us as family. Not really. We were supporting characters in their story. Grandpa was a plot device whose only remaining purpose was to fund their retirement fantasy. Elliot and I were the responsible ones who would clean up the mess while they sailed off into the sunset. They didn't feel guilty because in their version of events, they were the heroes escaping a difficult situation. The sick father, the struggling lake house, the Canadian winters, those were just obstacles in their grand adventure. And we were the extras they could afford to leave behind. That realization burned away every last trace of hesitation. I called Mrs. Patterson first thing Monday morning. I showed her everything. The forged power of attorney, the unauthorized HELOC, the fraudulent withdrawals from the trust. Her face went white. Nora, this is criminal. This is elder abuse under the criminal code. They could face charges. I know, I said. But first, I need to protect Grandpa. Over the next 5 days, I moved fast. I went to the bank with Mrs. Patterson and the legitimate power of attorney. We froze the original trust account entirely. No withdrawals by anyone without my presence and 2 pieces of ID. I opened a new protected account, the Harold Aldrin Care Fund, with me and Elliot as the only signatories. I transferred $270,000, everything remaining in the trust, into the new account. Then I contacted the bank that held the HELOC and filed a formal fraud complaint with copies of the forged documents. I reported the matter to the Ontario Provincial Police, and I documented everything. Every receipt, every bank statement, every forged signature. I built a case file so thorough it could have been submitted to the CRA as an audit report. I left the old trust account open with a 0 balance. I wanted them to see it. I wanted them to try. Friday came. My parents arrived at the lake house for what they said was one last weekend together before the cold sets in. They were giddy. My father kept making jokes about how he wouldn't miss shoveling the driveway. My mother made a big show of cooking Grandpa's favorite roast, playing old Lightfoot records, sitting with him on the dock. She held his hand and told him she loved him. I watched from the kitchen window, and for the first time, I didn't feel guilty. I just felt tired. Saturday morning, they were gone before dawn. They left a note on the kitchen counter, written in my mother's neat handwriting. Gone to start our next chapter. The lake house is in good hands with you two. We'll be in touch. Take care of Dad. Elliot found it first. He stood in the kitchen holding the note, his face blank. He read it twice, then set it down very carefully on the counter, like it might crumble if he held it too hard. They actually did it, he said. His voice was hoarse. They actually just left him. I put my hand on his shoulder. I know. He went out to the dock and sat there alone for a long time. I let him be. I understood. Even when you know it's coming, even when you've prepared for it, there's a specific kind of grief that comes from your parents choosing themselves over you. It doesn't matter that you're an adult. It doesn't matter that you saw the signs. It still feels like being 8 years old and realizing that the people who are supposed to love you the most are capable of walking away without looking back. I gave them 72 hours. That's how long it took. My phone rang on a Tuesday morning. International number. Portugal country code. A heavily accented voice asked for Miss Nora Aldrin. This is Nora. Good morning, Miss Aldrin. I am Andrea, from the Silver Coast Residences in Nazaré. I'm calling regarding your parents, Mr. Cliff and Mrs. Margaret. They listed you as their financial guarantor on their residency application. I'm afraid we have an issue with their deposit. Let me guess, I said. The payment was declined. A pause. That is correct. Their transfer from a Canadian account was rejected. They are quite upset and have asked me to call you to resolve the situation. In the background, I could hear my father's voice, tight and furious, saying something about a mistake, a misunderstanding, that his daughter would fix it. There's no mistake, I told Andrea, and I'm not their financial guarantor. I never agreed to that. Whatever documents they showed you with my name on them are fraudulent, just like the ones they used to take out a $95,000 loan on my grandfather's home. The silence on her end told me she was beginning to understand the situation. I heard my mother's voice now, panicked, grabbing the phone. Nora! What have you done? The account is empty. Where is the money? The money is exactly where it belongs, Mom. In a protected account for Grandpa's care. Where Grandma always intended it to be. You had no right. I had every right. I'm the trustee. And while we're on the subject, you should know that the OPP has been notified about the forged power of attorney and the fraudulent HELOC. Mrs. Patterson is preparing a civil suit for elder financial abuse. So before you say anything else, I'd suggest you talk to a lawyer. My father took the phone. His voice was different now. Not angry, scared. Nora, sweetheart, let's not be hasty. We can work this out. We're family. You stopped being family the moment you forged Grandpa's signature and tried to steal his home. I'm offering you one thing, 2 economy tickets back to Toronto. That's it. When you get here, we sit down with Mrs. Patterson and figure out how to fix the damage you've done. Otherwise, you can deal with the OPP on your own. He started to argue. I hung up. They flew back 5 days later. They couldn't afford to stay. Their credit cards were maxed, their Portugal deposit was gone, and they had nowhere else to go. They arrived at the lakehouse looking 10 years older, their suitcases scuffed, their faces gray. No more breezy smiles, no more grand adventure energy. Just 2 people who had bet everything on a fantasy and lost. Elliot, Mrs. Patterson, and I were waiting in the cafe. I had the tables pushed together and 2 folders sitting in the center. My parents sat down. My mother tried to start talking, tried to explain, tried to spin it. Mrs. Patterson raised her hand. Margaret, I'd advise you to listen before you speak. I opened the first folder. This is a full accounting of the trust fund, the original $320,000 minus legitimate expenses over the past 3 years. The current balance, now in the protected Harold Aldrin Care Fund, is $270,000. You have no access to it. You never will. I opened the second folder. This is the documentation for the HELOC you fraudulently took out against this property. $95,000. Forged power of attorney. Forged notarization. The bank has been notified, and the OPP has a file. The first payment is due in 17 days. If it's not paid, the bank forecloses on Grandpa's home. I laid out the terms. Option A. They sign a legal agreement relinquishing any claim to the lakehouse property, the trust fund, and any inheritance. In exchange, Elliot and I would use a portion of the protected funds to pay off the fraudulent HELOC and save the property. They would be allowed to live in the small, winterized cabin at the edge of the property, the one Grandpa used to rent to ice fishermen. They would have no financial authority over anything. They would contribute to the property's upkeep through labor, clearing brush, stacking firewood, maintaining the dock. And they would have supervised visits with Grandpa, never alone. Option B. They refuse, the HELOC defaults, the bank forecloses, and Mrs. Patterson files criminal charges for elder abuse, fraud, and forgery under the Criminal Code of Canada. She also files with the Superior Court of Justice for a restraining order barring them from contact with my grandfather. My mother looked at the documents. Her lip trembled. You can't do this to your own parents? You did it to your own father, I said. My father signed first. His hand was shaking, but not from Parkinson's, from something else entirely. My mother signed after him, tears running down her face. Whether they were tears of shame or just self-pity, I honestly couldn't tell. That was 8 months ago. The lakehouse is still standing. Elliot's cafe had its best summer yet. He added a wood-fired pizza oven and started doing Friday night dinners that book out a week in advance. Grandpa's home care aide, a wonderful woman named Priya, comes 3 days a week now, and on his good days, Grandpa sits by the lake and watches the boats and tells stories about catching pike with his bare hands. He's happy. He's safe. That's all that matters. My parents live in the cabin. My father splits wood every morning and clears the trails on weekends. My mother helps with the laundry and the dishes. They don't complain. They don't have the standing to complain. Sometimes I see them sitting on the cabin porch in the evening, looking out at the lake, and I wonder if they understand yet what they almost threw away. Not the money, not the property, but the people who would have taken care of them if they'd only been willing to take care of someone else first. Elliot asked me once, late at night after Grandpa was asleep, if I ever felt bad about what we did. I thought about it for a long time. Then I said, no, I don't feel bad. I feel clear. There's a difference between cruelty and consequence. I didn't punish my parents. I just stopped protecting them from themselves. I stopped being the anchor that held everything in place while they tried to sink the ship. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family is to draw a hard line and refuse to cross it. We let go of the parents we hoped they'd become. And in doing that, Elliot and I finally became the people our grandparents always believed we could be. The lake house still stands. The loons still come back every spring, and my grandfather still watches them from the dock, wrapped in his flannel blanket, smiling at a world that, for a few more precious moments, still makes sense to him.